Hi guys, Mrs.T here, ready to read chapter 21. If you're noticing my background has changed, it's because Aiden is currently napping in my comfy chair that I read from. So I relocated into the dining room. And so hopefully the other two kids will stay quiet, or they may even pop in, as they often do. But I'm gonna go ahead and get reading. Chapter 21, the bookseller's card. And the word ladder here is card, care, core, corn, torn, turn. What they found in the den was a snow globe the size of a soccer ball, with glass thick enough to withstand a hammer's blow. Lying on the carpeted floor, its wooden stand sat empty on the desk above. How in the name of Lambert Falls did that happen? Norbridge exclaimed. He knelt and picked up the globe to examine it. A blizzard of snowflakes within swirled around a slate-gray mansion set beside a cluster of fir trees. Norbridge shifted the globe back and forth, studying it for cracks. That couldn't have just rolled to the ground by itself, he said, setting the globe back on its stand. Was there an earthquake? Did any of you feel anything? A tremble? Or a trembler? Timber? A temper? The Templars? Something? Nothing that I felt, Leona said. Maybe you left it sitting in just like a funny angle. Norbridge held up a finger in protest. This was not human error on the part of this human, he said. The den grew very quiet. Norbridge looked at Elizabeth. Do you have any thoughts at all regarding this little incident? She felt Norbridge could see right through her, as though he somehow knew very well that her presence had caused this. Another part of her was wondering why these things continued to happen to her. It's an enigma to me, Elizabeth said. Perhaps it has to do with some change in the barometric pressure in the room, Freddie suggested. Norbridge examined him, and then Elizabeth, and then Freddie once more. Let's get you both to bed. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Freddie said to Elizabeth in the corridor, the second floor, as they headed to their rooms. That I have the book, Elizabeth said. And before Freddie could say anything, she said, yeah, I'm thinking that. But how could I have just happened to find it on my first day here when Norbridge has been looking for it for years? Weirder things have happened, I guess, but the probability would be really low. And I can't tell him about it now, Elizabeth said. I mean, I basically stole it from the library. And if I tell him, he and Leona will definitely think something is wrong with me, especially after they caught us there tonight and now everything else he told us. She frowned, the little furrow appearing between her eyebrows. This is bad. So why did you take it out of the library? Freddie said. I still don't understand. Elizabeth considered. She tried to think back to the feeling she'd had when she'd been in the nine-sided room, but her memory of that moment was blurry, like something that had happened years before. I don't know, she said. Something just came over me. It seemed like an interesting book and I wanted to read it, I guess. I figured no one would miss it. Freddie pushed at his glasses, gave her a perplexed look. Can I see the card Marcus gave you? Maybe I can look up a shop online. Elizabeth took the card from her pocket, but as she was handing it to Freddie, she fumbled and it dropped to the carpet. When she knelt to pick it up, she gasped. Look at this, she said. She snatched up the card and displayed it between her thumb and forefinger upside down for Freddie. Look, she said, her voice filled with urgency. You've got it the wrong way. No, look at his signature upside down. Freddie peered at the card and saw the signature of Marcus Q. Himes. When viewed upside down, looked like S-W-E-T-H. Sweth? Freddie said. I don't get it. That's the middle name of the man who wrote the book, Elizabeth said. Riley Sweth Granger. That cannot just be a coincidence. With such strange names? There has to be some connection between the two of them. Maybe they're even related or something, like Marcus is a descendant. Maybe that's how he knows about the book. Freddie took the card from Elizabeth and examined it carefully, flipping it up and down to study the signature as it changed from Himes to Sweth and back again. That is actually very cool, he said, but bizarre. He handed the card back to Elizabeth. Still, it's kind of a stretch to think there's a connection, don't you think? For sure there's a connection. She tapped the card against her palm. And this clinches it for me. I must have the book. We should probably just keep all this to ourselves, don't you think? Freddie was squinting and seemed to be working through a difficult problem. Norbridge was pretty upset, and I do not want to get on his bad side. Elizabeth's curiosity about the book and Marcus and Selena Himes had taken another leap forward with this latest discovery, and she felt on fire to continue investigating. But Norbridge had asked them to let it go, and now Freddie, despite this new revelation, was urging the same thing. If she insisted on pursuing matters, it was doubtful that Freddie would actually go along. I agree, she said. I'm really curious about everything, but I agree with you. The book, too, Freddie said. I was thinking maybe we should secretly return it to the library, like just drop it in the return slot, or you can hide it where you found it. I don't think it's anything we should be messing around with. Elizabeth nodded. I'd been thinking the same thing. As she considered it, however, the slightest bit of reluctance seeped into her. She also thought again about the strange silver letters that Freddie had been unable to see. Maybe there really was something magical about the book, though why she could see the letters and Freddie couldn't was a mystery. I'm just going to keep it for one more day, though, okay? Just to look it over a little bit more. That works, Freddie said. We can still try to figure out the message in Nestor's painting, but this other stuff, let's do what Norbridge says and try to just, I don't know, forget about it. Elizabeth slept poorly. Another nightmare disturbed her rest, though this time, instead of only the strange dark woman confronting her in the library, there seemed to be other people with her. Two shadowy figures that she couldn't make out. She woke up in a sweat, badly shaken. Unable to fall back asleep, she turned on the Tiffany lamp, sat on the couch, and thumbed through A Guide for Children. The letters T-H-E still appeared on the front page, and she felt relieved that they had remained unchanged. After rereading the book's final chapter 3 times and then skimming its many chapters in the strange introduction, she nodded off. When she awoke in the morning after she got ready for breakfast, she sat on the couch and opened the book. What she found made her gasp with astonishment. On the front page, beneath the author's name and the copyright date, were the letters T-H-E-K in silver print. What in the world is going on? Elizabeth thought. She didn't know whether to be more alarmed or amazed, but she was absolutely positive now that something very strange was happening, and it sent a thrill through her. A new letter appears each day. The problem was between promising Freddie that she'd return the volume and being unable to talk to Leona or Norbridge about it. This was a mystery she would have to solve, but on her own. She examined the book from front to back. The copyright date, 1897, stood out to her, the same year Winterhouse opened, she thought. She read again the chapter on the cipher, and then she laid the book on the cushion beside her and considered it, staring at it the way you might stare at some small creature you're thinking might suddenly wake up and start stirring. She couldn't stop thinking about whether or not, through some incredible coincidence, this might be the book. Every bit of evidence indicated that it absolutely was. A thought arose in her mind. During all those times when the feeling had come over her, she had been essentially its captive. The feeling was something that happened to her, not something that she made happen herself. As she examined the book, though, a curiosity gathered in her about whether it might be possible for her to decide to make the feeling occur if she could in some way control it. This possibility simmered in her thoughts as a prospect. How she might go about causing or inducing the feeling was a complete unknown, though staring at the book as she was and allowing her mind to settle just a bit had seemed to put her in a state very similar to what she often felt, just as the feeling was welling up. She continued to stare at the book and allowed her mind to become as calm as possible. Her vision went faintly blurry, and in that moment, although she couldn't be sure, because her eyes right then were so out of focus, she thought she saw the book quiver, almost. She snapped her head straight and adjusted her vision. The book sat completely still as she stared at it 2 or 3 minutes. She was shaking throughout. Did I make it move? She thought. It hardly seemed possible. Though when the chime sounded for breakfast and Elizabeth left her room to find Freddie and begin her day, She could not stop wondering about it. That afternoon, while she was helping Mr. Wellington and Mr. Rajput with their puzzle, Elizabeth asked them about something that had been on her mind ever since she'd seen them that second evening with their wives. "Do you remember a few days ago," Elizabeth said to Mr. Rajput, "when you mentioned how it might scare me to talk about Norbridge's sister, Gracella?" She wasn't sure she should bring this up so directly to him, particularly because Mr. Rajput had seemed more than usually glum after finding not a single piece the whole day that fit into the puzzle. Still, though, Elizabeth decided to take a chance. "What did you mean by that?" Mr. Wellington looked up. "Oh, that little comment?" he said. "Nothing. I mean, really nothing at all." Mr. Rajput began to rub his temples with both hands as if to soothe a deepening headache. "I'm the one who said it," he said, "and I meant what I said." He looked to Mr. Wellington. "She's not a little girl, and it's just an old story from a long time ago." Mr. Wellington stood up straight, put his hands on his hips, and frowned. "But Mr. Rajput," he said, "sharing such unpleasant tales." Elizabeth was thoroughly confused at this point. "What story are you talking about?" she said. Mr. Rajput gave Mr. Wellington a stare, as though now that the tall man had crossed him, he was going to proceed as he liked. "Mr. Wellington's wife has told us more than once that Norbridge's sister was, well, batty," he said. "You know, a regular loony bird, all carried away with talking about spirits and magic and whatnot. And a very unkind person to boot. Once, when she was no older than 10, she got so mad at her brother and the other kids that she told them one day she would destroy Winterhouse." He goggled his eyes wide in emphasis. "The thing is, they say she actually did go on to study magic and spells, and then she ran away. Some people say she wanted to return here someday and actually try to do what she said she intended, though rumor has it she died many years ago or disappeared or some such." "Ugh, ancient stories," Mr. Wellington said with a huff. "Really, Mr. Rajput, to share such things with our young puzzle helper, as if we know anything at all about the history of this place." "It's okay," Elizabeth said. "I don't mind." She looked at the two men as they kept their eyes locked on each other. She wasn't quite sure what to make of what she'd been told. She thought back to how she'd seen the Himeses standing in front of the paintings of Norbridge and Gracella. "It's not really that scary, to tell you the truth, so don't worry about it," she said. Mr. Wellington let out a quick sigh and straightened his tie with a jerking motion of his hand. "Oh, hey, look," Elizabeth said, just then fixing the piece she was holding into a small cluster of pieces of the sky. "It fits." "Remarkable," Mr. Rajput said, and the three of them resumed working on the puzzle. Elizabeth remained with them for half of an hour and found two more pieces. "Gracella, Marcus, and Selina," Elizabeth said to herself once she left the two men and was heading to her room. "What if there's a connection? What if the book is the missing piece?" She stopped to examine the bust of Nestor Falls on the landing in the main staircase to the second floor. When she'd hidden a clue behind it during the scavenger hunt with Freddie, she had noticed its inscription and had been meaning to copy it into her notebook under "important things people have said or written that I didn't want to forget." So now she wrote it down. "Some people say this world of ours is just a tumbling stone. No soul, no guide, no heart within, mere atoms all alone. But I believe there's more to things than simply meets the eyes. There's good and bad, and so I say, make sure the good survives." She examined the words printed in her notebook. She read them silently to herself twice before heading to her room. The next few days flew by. Elizabeth spent her time skiing, sledding, swimming, and more with Freddie, and she spent hours reading or wandering the library, and even spotted Marcus and Selina Himes there from a distance and steered clear of them. She went to the nightly concert. She listened with interest to lectures about Easter Island and Indian tea. She helped Mr. Wellington and Mr. Rajput with their puzzle. She watched movies in the small theater, sat by the fireplace in Winter Hall, examined the paintings in the portrait hall, especially the one of Nestor Falls, though she and Freddie made no headway on solving the code, and studied the many murals and paintings and photographs along the corridors of the hotel. A mound of presents grew under the tree in Winter Hall. A thicket of decorations gathered across the ceiling and walls. Crates of Florschen massed at the delivery bay on the ground floor, and a busy hum of excitement grew from a hotel full of guests and bellhops and cooks and cleaners. Elizabeth made a new list in her little notebook, Best Christmas Ever, and put the one at Winterhouse in the top spot. Or rather, the only spot, because none of her previous Christmases had been a fraction this good. A single thing troubled Elizabeth's mind over those days, and that was the knowledge that she hadn't kept her promise to Freddie to actually return the book. Though to her relief, he hadn't asked her about it. The fact was, she felt glad that she had kept a guide for children because, sure enough, each day a new letter appeared next to the others on the same front page. Now, a week after she found the strange book in the library, the letters in silver read, T-H-E, K-E-Y-I, which made Elizabeth think that maybe before too long the key word itself would be revealed. If I can just keep the book a few more days, she thought, I'll be able to solve Nestor's code. She didn't feel good about being deceptive, but she decided to keep everything a secret from Freddie for now. The thing she didn't want was for him to be disappointed in her for not keeping her word. One other reason she had held on to the book was so that she could attempt the same exercise she'd tried the morning after Norbridge had told her its story. On 4 occasions she had tried to make it stir, but on none of these had she been able to drum up the feeling, even remotely, and she certainly hadn't made the book, or anything else for that matter, move even an inch. All of this, the silver letters, the strange chapters, and that moment when she felt sure she'd made the volume quiver, seemed confusing to her. She found herself wondering why she, of all people, had found the book, and why some of its magic, if that's really what it was, seemed to be revealing itself to her. On the afternoon of Christmas Eve, Elizabeth joined Freddie in his workshop as he was pulverizing a mound of walnut shells inside a steel canister and slowly adding a thin stream of glue to the crumbling mix. I can't get it quite right, Freddie said. It's either too hard or too crumbly. I'm still doing something wrong, but it should end up looking like a log sooner or later. It was inspiring to see Freddie perfecting his wonder log, she thought, and she felt glad that he didn't mind her watching him work. She had known him for over a week now, and she could almost pinch herself when she thought she had finally, through some miracle of being here at Winterhouse, without her aunt and uncle to ruin things, made a good friend. She even thought Freddie was the sort of person who, had he seen the house she lived in or met Aunt Purdy or Uncle Burlap, would still have wanted to be her friend. I was thinking, Elizabeth said, maybe we can stay in touch after we leave Winterhouse. I mean, if you want to. Freddie looked up. I was thinking the same thing. We should. There was no computer at her aunt and uncle's house, but she could use one at school easily enough. I could email you, she said. Email, Freddie said. A mile. Hey, here's another good one. The Morse code turns into here comes dots. You're getting way too good at those, Elizabeth studied the steel canister Freddie held as he returned to work. I'll bet you perfect. Sorry. I bet you'll perfect your wonder log soon. Context. English is hard. We've talked about this, guys. I really do. I'm just glad Norbridge lets me work on it, Freddie said. Whoop. Hi, Savannah. At home, my parents would never let me do anything like this. Yeah, but don't they know how smart you are? Freddie shrugged. I guess they don't trust me, he said. Norbridge is different. He stopped working and nodded. You know, there's a school in the town right nearby. It's where all the local kids go. He went back to twisting the crank on a compressing vise he was using, studying the canister all the while as he slowly applied more pressure. Elizabeth pictured herself at the school, maybe her and Freddie both. Wouldn't that be so great to go there, she said, and live here? A sharp crack sounded and the top of the steel canister popped open. A shower of walnut pieces sprayed upward and the canister fell to the ground. Yikes, Freddie yelled as he and Elizabeth jumped back. Everything okay? Elizabeth said as she steadied herself. Freddie sighed, surveyed the mess on the ground. Everything's okay, but back to the drawing board. As they cleaned up, Freddie grew oddly quiet, and Elizabeth began to think he was upset with himself over what had happened. Are you excited about tonight? She said, to break the silence. Definitely, he said, though he didn't sound as enthusiastic as she thought he would. You know, I was thinking, it's Christmas Eve tonight, and then Christmas tomorrow, and everything's kind of full swing. He looked at his supplies on the table. "And I've got my projects going on." Elizabeth wasn't sure what he was trying to say, although she became worried he might be trying to tell her he wouldn't have time, or didn't want to make time, to do things with her over their remaining days at Winterhouse. "You're probably going to be, pretty busy on the wonder logs," she said. "Is that what you're saying? Like you're going to be too busy to do stuff?" He shook his head. "No, that's not what I mean. I mean, yes, I'll be busy, but what I'm getting at is, well, you returned the book, didn't you?" That's what was on his mind, Elizabeth thought. An uneasy feeling moved through her as she considered what she ought to say. She was just about to claim that with all the excitement at Winterhouse, she'd actually forgotten she had the book, or even that she had already returned it, but she decided to tell him the truth, or at least most of the truth. "I know I said I'd put it back," Elizabeth said, "and I will. I like looking at it. I'll return it after Christmas, I promise. I thought you were going to return it a couple of days ago." "I'll return it tomorrow." "For sure?" "I promise." She was tempted to tell him about the letters that continued to appear each day, but she already felt bad for having misled him about the book overall. Maybe, she thought, it was best not to explain the real reason for her reluctance to return it. And besides, he couldn't see the silver letters anyway. It might seem strange to him if she kept insisting that she was seeing words somehow materializing in a book he preferred that she had left in the library. "Okay, I just really think you should return the book and forget about all this," Freddie said. "We should focus on all the activities and things here at Winterhouse." "I know," Elizabeth said. "I don't want to ruin anything." She tried not to let disappointment creep into her tone, but she couldn't help feeling that Freddie was telling her, finally and clearly, he was not interested in any of the mysteries that she was. "And the Himeses haven't really even been around at all," Freddie said. "I bet Norbridge talked to them and everything's fine." Elizabeth looked across the room, with its tidy spread of tools hung on hooks against the walls. The sawhorses and brooms and benches and plywood. Above all, she thought about how glad she was to have Freddie's friendship. She thought about Norbridge and Leona and how they had known each other for decades, it seemed, but they weren't at all tired of each other. "You're probably right," she said, and she pictured herself returning the Granger book and forgetting the whole thing. But just the tiniest bit of reluctance remained. Plus, she wanted to learn the key word. Bells sounded loudly from the corridor, and Elizabeth and Freddie looked at each other with wide eyes. "Dinner in an hour," she said. "We better get ready." He set his tools down and wiped his hand on a towel. "Norbridge told me tonight's party is going to be better than last year's, which would be hard to beat." Freddie tossed the towel on the table. "Come on, we don't want to be late." Takes us to chapter 22, and chapter 22 is called Christmas Eve and an Unexpected Note. And the word ladder is Eve. Ooh, oh, ode, odd. Can't wait for the next chapter.